I'd like to welcome you all to this very timely conference to discuss democracy in South Asia at a time when it seems to be under serious threat. So what we hope to discuss today is what does democracy and pluralism mean for the future of the region? Do artistic expression and development need change as a result of democracy and pluralism? How do democratic processes impact art and culture in South Asia? And conversely, how do art and culture impact democracy in the region?
And the Prince Klaus Fund was set up in 1996 as a fund for culture and development. And it was given as a present to Prince Klaus, who was then still alive, the father of our current king, on his 70th birthday. We say culture is a basic need. That, I think, very well captures the essence of our work. And so what does the fund do? We basically support artistic, creative, cultural expression, particularly in places where there is little support for cultural and creative and artistic expression, or where the freedom to express oneself is limited or lacking. We're here as the Prince Klaus Fund in a very special setting because actually we are meeting the last few days with what we call our network partners. Now, network partners, yesterday actually the term strategic partnership was used, but network partners are really the trusted partners of the Prince Klaus Fund, organizations working in the different fields of culture from all over the world. And today around the table we have, I'm just mentioning now the countries, I mean, I'll leave the introductions to the people themselves, but representatives from Colombia, from Congo, from Vietnam, from Albania, from Peru. So it's just a cross-section, and later will be joining us somebody, a representative from Ghana. So the world is represented here to meet the representatives from South Asia, and I wish that we all have today a very fruitful exchange of provocative and constructive thoughts. Thank you very much.
My task is perhaps to try and defend the title to begin with. Between Lakshmi, our friends in Amsterdam, and myself, we cooked up this title, and Sarita, Reclaiming the Creative Commons, the Southasian Surge Towards Pluralism, Freedom and Democracy. It's a bit of a defined title in the sense that reclaiming, implying that it is either been taken away or is in the process of being taken away, depending on which society we are coming from at this point, which part of South Asia or which part of the globe as represented by the partners who have been working with the Prince Klaus Fund, from Southeast Asia, East Asia to Latin America, South America, Africa, and here in South Asia. So reclaiming itself implies that all is not right, otherwise why would we need to reclaim? The other is, and also reclaiming implies you had it, it's taken away and you want it back. It is not just you want something you never had, and therefore all the more need for urgency to feel that people who've had the freedom of cultural freedoms, democratic freedoms, freedom of expression, freedom of belief and thought, and being taken away.
The debate about whether hate speech should be censored or protected has been a bitter bone of contention amongst those who are politically committed to safeguarding the rights of minorities. In India, the recurring debate on censoring hate speech was shaped largely by the rise of the Hindu right and the systematic targeting of Muslims during the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, culminating in the demolition of Babri Masjid. The debate acquired greater urgency after the state-supported genocide of Muslims in Gujarat 2002, which was supervised by the man who is now poised perhaps to be the Prime Minister. Judith Butler, who is this very well-known scholar of queer sexuality, rhetoric, performance, etc., she has engaged with this idea, and basically what she is alerting us to is the fact that the state is not a neutral player when it comes to this, and that it's the state that produces hate speech. And by this, she says that the state is not necessarily the cause of hate speech, but it is the final arbiter of hate speech. And therefore, the state will decide what constitutes hate speech. Because what do we do when we say that, we are invoking the law? We are basically asking the state to adjudicate on hate speech. So it is finally the state that will decide what constitutes hate speech and what does not constitute hate speech.
The biggest change that's bringing about is remittance, because it's for the first time the middle class can participate in some wealth making without having state support or intervention. This is a big change. And what is happening is that middle class, whether from the village or they are religious, but the ruling liberal left activists look down upon religion. And so this conflict, that seems to have been hidden, has now come up, saying that you guys do not respect us. We want religion as part of our life. And now, for the first time, they have money to expand that social and cultural space. They say, we want to practice religion. And so, religious activities are exploded. In the urban areas, what's happening is that these people with remittance money are sending their kids to universities. And this class is expanding at a rate which people don't see, because people don't want to talk about remittance. Because remittance is not of the class which is ruling class. Ruling class sends people, but the ruling class does not themselves go. So they do not understand the culture of those who are coming back with some money and saying, my culture, I reject the Western culture. I reject the Western narrative. I reject your interpretations. And finally, I reject your institutions. So in many ways, finally, we've reached a point where in construction of ideology, our relationship, for example, with India, which is going to become the biggest issue in the next 5 years for us. Because apart from the water sharing policy, Modi has said he'll send people, Bangladeshis, back. So what is happening is that you are going to see an explosion of Islamic activities. Can you contain it? I don't know.
Often I'm asked a very difficult question, can revolutionary poetry bring change and reform a society? Can it? Can the power of such words move the earth? And suddenly people at the helm of affairs will change and feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, create equal opportunities, end nepotism, erase gender inequality, bring education to all, end corruption. In short, can it perform miracles? I know these wonderful words do inspire us. They inspired me enough to dedicate most of my career singing such poetry, believing it might strike the right chord somewhere, someday. But can it change societies overnight? No. Such poetry can be likened to an architect's blueprint, a dream or even a warning or a roadmap which can come alive only when coupled with the serious intention of the listener or the reader to making it into a reality. वो दिन के जिसका वादा है, हम देखेंगे means we shall see. Okay, so just follow that. वो दिन के जिसका वादा है, हम देखेंगे जो लाहे अज़ल में लिखा है, हम देखेंगे लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे वो दिन के जिसका वादा है, हम देखेंगे जो लाहे अज़ल में लिखा है, हम देखेंगे लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे। जब जुल्मों सितम के कोहे गरा, जब जुल्म सितम के कोहे गरा, रूई की तरह उड़ जाएंगे हम महकूमों के पांव तले। ये धरती धड़ धड़ धड़केगी और अहले हकम के सरों पर जब बिजली कड़ कड़ कड़केगी, हम देखेंगे, लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे। The rest in the evening.
In the early 20th century, there were a lot of discussions about the form of documentary itself around the world, and there are many famous names, but the most well-known are, of course, of Dziga Vertov and John Grierson. And realism, the idea of the real, became sort of equated with the idea of truth, the real truth. I won't go into the there were differences between what Vertov felt the documentary should do and what Grierson felt documentary should do. But both were, of course, joined in the idea that this was a tool that could be used to uplift the masses, briefly put. One important difference, I think, is that Vertov saw it as something that the masses can use themselves to empower themselves, whereas Grierson came from a tradition where I think you could say there was a feeling that the masses are not up to democracy. They are not equal to to be actors in a democracy, and the responsibility of the elites is to educate them and uplift them, make them ready for democracy. And documentary is a very useful thing in that way. Now, in the earlier Films Division documentary, it kind of fell into this voice of God documentary. You're familiar with it. You don't have to be Indian to know this form of filmmaking, because the BBC has it, and I mean, you see that kind of film everywhere in the world. But basically, a very authoritative voice tells you what the truth is. And no matter how well the film is mounted, I feel one thing that always goes, it's that phrase, the plain, unvarnished truth. And that is the claim documentary is making. It's telling you that it's going to show you a truth that is not colored by this kind of drama of Hollywood or this opiate of Bollywood. Or this is not about that kind of misled thing. This is the real thing. This is what, if you can see this, you will become enlightened. So that's the kind of form, and there is a godlike or messianic figure who is delivering this message to you.
Engaging in critiquing democracy has become very important. State has been critiqued throughout, but very rarely we hear the critique of democracy, except that representative, participatory, bourgeois versus all kind of categories. But as times are changing, as people are engaged to different, do we need political parties for that matter? For someone like me who has been jailed, exiled during the democracy struggle, I never imagined other than the political parties as an avenue for organizing. But with the new forms of organization available to the public, I think we need to think about the role of political parties in democracies. I think democracy is a very important to left alone to the politicians. I think democracy recognizes the fact that all societies are diverse, but just celebrating diverse or acknowledging diversity is not enough. To practice the values that based on diversity to me is a pluralism. The diversity is empirical conditions, but pluralism is a philosophical condition. I think this is where the discussion to pluralism is required.
The Prince Klaus Fund has its network partners, which is essentially a crucial component of the work that we do. The network partners are 10 organizations that are located throughout the world. There are organizations from Africa to Asia to Latin America to Europe, who actually support the work that the Prince Klaus Fund does, whether it is through looking at a country context specifically, whether it's discussing interesting projects in the region, and looking at new collaborations and partnerships that we would like to also jointly develop, meaning also contacts, meaning also interesting new artists and developments in different regions.
No, I've been living and working in the Congo for almost 12 years, more than 12 years in fact. And I'm working as part of the Studios Kabako. The Studios Kabako have been founded in 2001 by Faustin Lignekula. Faustin is a Congolese stage director and a choreographer. And after a few years abroad, he decided to go back to the Congo and to create a space there, because he just realized at some point that the stories, because he's presenting himself first of all as a storyteller, and the kind of stories he wanted to tell was not stories of exile. So yes, Kisangani is quite remote because basically there is no road between Kinshasa and Kisangani. We are about 1,300 kilometers from Kinshasa, so you have to fly there or to take a boat. A boat, it's about 3 weeks. To fly, it's 1 hour and 45 minutes, but it's $60 return ticket, so it's $600. 60 would be great. $600, so it's very, very expensive. And then there is just one road going to the eastern part of the country, but it's very, very unsafe at the moment. It just reopened in 2007. Until 2007 there was no road at all. Now there is a road, but it's really, really unsafe. So basically it's quite isolated, but it's still a 1 million city. Then about democratization, that's a big issue. I mean, that's true that I think in many African countries now we are facing a kind of democracy dead end, and the democracy election, or I would say on the Western manner, have led to a kind of lot of religious tension, prevarication, resurgence of corruption, and Congo is the same. There was quite a democratic election in 2005, but then since then it's quite the situation is really bad. So how do you deal with that? I don't know. I think the project of the Studio Kabako is not about art. First of all, it's about to create something in a context where it's very difficult for most of the people to believe in anything. So something lasting, a project with which people can identify, not necessarily understand everything, but we try to have always this sense of belonging, or this sense of a kind of reconnection. What position do you, in such a context, what is your position? That's a question we're asking to the young artists and people we are working with. What are your position in your context and in your society? Because it's all about taking responsibility.
So now Arc Africa has a series of programs that really understands the role of just try to understand or debate or discourse the role of creativity in Africa's built and cultural space. So this is where we are at the moment. But freedom comes with responsibility. And this is what we, as Arc Africa, is trying to engage in certain topics to let people recognize that for this democracy and democratic spaces to exist or to grow, we have a huge role to play as individuals and as organizations.
As a curator, they wanted me to facilitate the connections between ideas of education and to increase the criticality in creative production, to better understand what it means to have a historical consciousness. What does it mean to be Vietnamese? Can we claim a Vietnamese, considering our colonial history as being so fraught and violent? And working in a communist country where we are censored with absolutely every single cultural project that we do. To do anything publicly requires a license from the government. To publish a book requires a license from the government. To do a concert, to do a piece of music in public, everything requires permission. So, for instance, I did bring a photograph here, it's on the wall. This is a photograph by a Saigonese journalist. His name is Phang Quang. And he studied journalism in Vietnam and was one of the country's most better-known photojournalists. And he came back from several field trips across the country, working with ethnic minorities, nuclear power plant issues, land reform, removals of whole entire communities. He would take swaths of all of these photos and come back to the photographic office, and the only photo that would be published each time would have no people in it, and it would have no significant landmark in it either, because the government don't want the identification of an image with an issue that then becomes stereotyped into a kind of meaning. So Phang Quang, for a project he did with us in the beginning of 2013, it was called Space Limit, and basically he proposed to build a bamboo structure over the entire villa. We're a 3-story villa in Saigon, and he built this beautiful architectural sculpture encasing the entire gallery in a kind of bamboo prison. And there was a series of 9 photographs taken in different contexts in Vietnam. One was a school, like this. Another one is sitting in a family living room with a bunch of children sitting underneath a cage watching television. And another is showing a businessman with his fancy new Mercedes and inside a cage also. These are not photoshopped, these are for real. So anyway, we did the project, asked for license, 6 meetings with cultural officials, arguing what is relational aesthetics. How do we argue, is it possible for an artist to have a political message that isn't denigrating to the government? Well, funnily enough, over 6 conversations that were each an hour long over a lot of coffee, and we were feeling very confident. Okay, well, I think we're going to get the license. 6 meetings on. So it was 2 days before the opening, and we get our little piece of paper. Not allowed, not allowed, not allowed, not allowed. The one thing that was allowed was the actual physical cage over the entire gallery. So the government said it's okay to have a living human being experience what it's like being inside a cage, but you cannot represent it. And I thought that was really interesting into the power of imagery for a communist government that believes that images are propaganda.
My personal efforts and the efforts of TICA or the group of people that I work with have to do in providing means and conditions on a continuous basis to sustain and support artistic production because of the lack of such structures or infrastructures in the country. For me, it's more important to provide the continuous support to the local scene, but at the same time creating mechanisms that can bring in artists from abroad or bringing experts from abroad like curators and other people and put them together. Mentioned here, there is so much common history filled with differences, filled with each of us differences. And that was very important for me to investigate through artistic works. And that's why I wanted to bring together artists from the region, to put them together to share these common experiences, but also to see what tensions come out from the differences.
We started first developing a small network of artists, proven artists that work with new media. In that time, as you might remember, new media was a little bit more difficult to fund or to find money to develop projects that were much more expensive. The access to machines, to computers were not that easy. We started to go a little bit further to see how all these creators working with technology, they could also implement certain ideas that they had, not just for showing artworks, but also to impact on society in let's say, transformative ways, using technology. So, for example, and I was talking yesterday with a lady about this, there are lots of data, governmental data, state data, that is available. Perhaps it's not visible, but it's there. It's on web servers, on certain websites. So what we did is we pushed the local government to liberate those services, and with those services, people started to develop applications. So we did it once, and since there was such a push from us, then now the city council, they organize every year one of these, what is defined as hackathon, which is basically a 36-hour intense marathon of programmers that use this open data to develop applications that could be very useful for the city. actually with the support of Prince Klaus, to bring the museum out and in some sense to engage with the communities, to give voice to the communities.
And when the museum go out, the important for us is that the community has voice, and to have
also that what they do, what they produce, what they create, all of these communities also should be going back to the museum, should have some kind of visibility. So it's twofold.
Prince Klaus Fund and also all of our network partners here thank Southasia Trust and we're proud that you're a partner of the Prince Klaus Fund, and this has been a wonderful actually side event to our annual meeting that we have here in Nepal. The meeting so far has been great. We have had the opportunity to meet many Nepali artists, cultural organizations, and also to meet among ourselves. It has been a pleasure and an honor really to be here, a privilege to see all of you, to meet all of you. I hope you stay connected to the Prince Klaus Fund, each one of you.